Ladies and gentlemen, something massive just detonated across the state of Minnesota, and the shockwaves are already spreading nationwide because tonight, for the first time in American history, a sitting president, President Donald J. Trump, has completely suspended protections for an entire population tied to one state and unleashed a full-scale federal deportation review after investigators traced billions of stolen taxpayer dollars from Minnesota straight into the hands of Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-linked terror group operating in Somalia. And if you think that sounds unbelievable, buckle up, guys, because the evidence federal agents uncovered in the last 72 hours didn't just change policy. It triggered an emergency national security response. Inside Minnesota's largest Somali communities, panic is erupting. Families are terrified. Lawyers are overwhelmed. Phones are ringing off the hook. And government offices, the same ones accused of ignoring fraud for years, suddenly have nothing to say. Now, this isn't speculation. This isn't rumor. This is the result of the largest welfare fraud investigation in Minnesota's history, exposing fake meal sites, fake autism clinics, fake housing claims, fake rosters, fake invoices, all funneling money into a pipeline investigators are now saying terror networks were skimming from. And tonight, Trump made it clear, if the money trail leads to terrorism, the protections end now. Minnesota is on fire, Washington's on alert, and the rest of the country is asking one question: how deep does this go? Hit the like button and subscribe, folks. So when President Trump signed this emergency order terminating Somali TPS in Minnesota, it wasn't this gradual phase out. It wasn't a warning or some cautious policy shift. This was immediate, sweeping, and designed to halt what federal officials are now calling a rapid escalation national security vulnerability. Overnight, tens of thousands lost their long-standing protections. Immigration offices were blindsided, DHS field units were activated, and across Minnesota, this move hit like an earthquake, sending waves of panic through a community that had never experienced anything this sudden, this aggressive, or this consequential. And so the shock truly detonated when President Trump posted this announcement directly on Truth Social, accusing Minnesota of becoming a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity, enriching terror networks abroad. Now, that single message right there, blunt, unfiltered, and unmistakable, instantly reframed the story from this immigration debate into a urgent national security crisis. I mean, the wording implied not just fraud, but fraud that was tied to terrorism. And so by the time the media outlets caught up with this, fear had already spread. Immigration lawyers' phones exploded, community leaders scrambled, the political landscape shifted in minutes. Now, Minnesota isn't just home to a Somali community. It is home to the largest Somali population in America, with an estimated 70,000 residents relying on various forms of legal status, TPS extensions, or humanitarian protections. Many fled civil war or instability decades ago. Their lives, their jobs, homes, and futures, their children's futures are rooted in Minnesota. So when Trump ended TPS, specifically for Somali nationals tied to the state, the impact was immediate and deeply personal. It wasn't just a policy shift somewhere else. It hit the exact community where the alleged fraud ring operated, creating maximum uncertainty and fear. So within hours, mosques, community centers, and cultural groups, they were overwhelmed. Emergency meetings formed across Minneapolis and St. Paul as families demanded answers. Parents kept children home from school. Rumors of raids spread on social media. Immigration offices were packed before sunrise. Somali leaders, they called the move an attack, while residents described a sense of betrayal from a government that they believe had protected them for decades. Now, the atmosphere wasn't just nervous. It was frantic. It was confused and emotionally explosive. Now, behind the scenes, senior federal agents, they delivered this classified briefing to President Trump outlining what they described as coordinated, multi-layered fraud operations inside Minnesota's social services programs. Now, this wasn't some small-scale, small-time fraud. It involved shell nonprofits, fake clinics, fabricated rosters, falsified billing, and suspicious overseas transfers. Now, according to officials, the scale, speed, and organization of these schemes raised red flags that the money wasn't simply being pocketed, it was being moved. That briefing was the moment Trump reportedly decided immediate action was unavoidable. Now, investigators then presented the explosive allegation triggering national panic that stolen taxpayer funds routed through Minnesota's massive welfare fraud networks, they were funneled overseas through informal transfer systems that the Shabaab took a cut of as money flowed into Somalia. Now, whether the senders intended it or not, federal analysts warned the president that U.S. taxpayer dollars may have indirectly supported a terrorist organization. Now, that allegation right there alone transformed this whole situation from fraud to a national security threat. Now, before we move on, let me just say this. A wise decision blesses more than just you. Fix your Medicare plan and your whole family feels safer. Chapter strengthens your Medicare coverage so that your loved ones don't have to worry about you. Now, one viewer told me, my kids told me they slept better after I called. Now, most people making decisions that bless their family are calling the phone number at the bottom of your screen right there, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron. That phone number again is 909-563-8279. And Cecil Frith left us a comment the other day saying, thanks for the chapter link. I am now saving $166 a month. When all you have for income is Social Security, $166 is a sweet raise. Thanks, Buck. Now, federal investigators pointed to this now infamous Feeding Our Future scandal as one of the biggest indicators of a coordinated network. More than 200 fake meal sites popped up during the pandemic, including one 35-seat restaurant that claimed to serve 18,000 meals a day. How do you serve 18,000 people a day with only 35 seats? That don't even sound right. Fake invoices, fake rosters, and fabricated attendance sheets allowed criminals to siphon off more than $300 million. Over 80 individuals have been indicted so far, and this wasn't just sloppy oversight. This was a sophisticated system exploiting pandemic relief at staggering scale. Now, another warning sign came from a $14 million autism therapy scam where clinics billed Medicare and Medicaid for therapy sessions that never even occurred, involving children who didn't even have autism. Go figure. Investigators discovered forged diagnostic documents, falsified treatment logs, and billing codes recycled across multiple fake patients. This exposed yet another arm of the growing fraud network. Now, what shocked investigators and federal agents most wasn't the dollar amount. It was how seamlessly the operation blended in with the broader pattern of systemic abuse. Now, one of the most alarming discoveries came from Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services Program. This is where spending exploded from $2.5 million to $661 million in just 6 months. Federal analysts said that the spike was so extreme that it could only happen in a system completely unprotected against exploitation. State investigators eventually admitted most of the funds likely went to the criminals. The rapid surge suggested a coordinated effort to drain the program before oversight caught up, and that oversight never did. And a Somali-American former state fraud investigator who once attempted to sound the alarm publicly confirmed what federal prosecutors are now piecing together. He wrote that it was uncomfortable but true, that nearly all defendants in the largest fraud cases came from his own community. His statement didn't generalize or accuse innocent people. It simply highlighted a pattern that was ignored for years. His warnings, dismissed by state officials, now look like missed opportunities to stop billions in losses. Federal prosecutors ultimately concluded that Minnesota's fraud cases weren't random or disconnected. They were part of a linked multi-program criminal ecosystem. Fraud in child nutrition, housing aid, autism therapy, and Medicaid billing, they all showed overlapping names, money routes, and organizational structures. The U.S. Attorney's Office described the situation as fraud stacked on fraud, with criminal rings exploiting every vulnerable government program simultaneously. This confirmation reframed the crisis from local scandal to sweeping federal priority. So once the first indictments and investigative reports became public, a tidal wave of new information pours in. Insiders, former employees, contractors, and even relatives of defendants contacted federal agents with evidence. Every tip expanded the scope. So what began as a pandemic meal investigation quickly grew and spiraled into a wide-ranging federal fraud probe, uncovering money transfers, suspicious nonprofits, and shell operations previously unknown to authorities. So the sense inside federal agencies was clear. The network was far bigger than initially believed, and the scale of this fraud raised one haunting question. How did Minnesota's government miss all this? Agencies were overwhelmed, understaffed, and in some cases, completely unprepared for the surge in claims. Inspectors ignored obvious red flags like tiny restaurants claiming to feed entire cities because systems just weren't designed to flag these absurd numbers. And underneath it all was political hesitation. Officials feared pushing too hard on fraud concentrated within a politically influential voting bloc. Now, behind closed doors, multiple insiders claimed Minnesota's leadership didn't just want to jeopardize support for a key demographic group. The Somali American community holds substantial electoral influence in Minneapolis and surrounding areas. I mean, this is Ilhan Omar's district, is it not? Prosecutors, investigators, and even auditors hinted that political pressure led to softened scrutiny and delayed investigations. And so, whether intentional or not, this fear of backlash allowed fraud to metastasize unchecked, leaving billions unaccounted for, and creating this perfect storm that forced federal intervention under President Trump. So, when the fraud evidence became public, two figures, Governor Tim Walz and Representative Ilhan Omar, were conspicuously silent. Now, both Governor Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar, they previously championed Minnesota's social programs, yet neither of them offered immediate explanations or transparency once the indictments began stacking up. Critics interpreted Ilhan Omar and Governor Tim Walz's silence as political self-preservation, especially after revelations connecting fraud rings to organizations that previously engaged with local officials. Their refusal to address the scandal fueled suspicions that leadership had ignored warnings long before federal agents stepped in. Now, what pushed this crisis onto President Trump's desk was the combination of failed state oversight, staggering financial losses, and the emerging possibility that stolen U.S. taxpayer dollars were enriching a foreign terrorist network. So once the fraud crossed international borders, federal criminal jurisdictions were activated. Trump viewed this situation as both a national security threat and a systemic exploitation of vulnerable government programs, prompting his decision to intervene directly and decisively with nationwide implications. Determined to uncover the full scope of the operation, federal agents traced money flowing out of Minnesota through a web of Halawa networks, suspicious wire transfers, shell businesses, and so-called charitable aid organizations. Now, these informal systems of moving money across borders often leave limited paper trails, but investigators still identified repeating patterns and overlapping senders. Their findings revealed that stolen funds were being funneled overseas at a scale that suggested not individual opportunists, but a coordinated infrastructure built to evade detection. So in Somalia, Shabaab controls territory, road systems, checkpoints, and major economic corridors. Any money that's entering those regions, whether humanitarian aid, cash transfers, or remittances, typically passes through areas where Shabaab imposes mandatory taxes. Federal analysts explain that this doesn't require direct collaboration. The group simply extracts revenue from anything moving through its domain. So this is why investigators warned President Trump that even unintentional transfers could result in terrorist enrichment, intensifying the urgency that's behind this immediate policy action. Word that Minnesota fraud schemes may have indirectly routed money to Shabaab ignited national outrage. Across social media, talk radio, and conservative circles, Americans expressed disbelief that welfare programs could be exploited so easily, and anger that stolen taxpayer dollars might have actually helped a foreign terrorist organization. Now, some moderates and Democrats demanded accountability, but among conservatives, the fury was sharper. Many saw this crisis as proof that weak immigration oversight and lax welfare controls created massive national security vulnerabilities. Now, President Trump, he addressed the nation with a direct, unmistakable message. Any immigration protection compromised by fraud or tied to terror risk, this would be immediately revoked. He framed the TPS termination not as punishment against an entire community, but as a non-negotiable national security measure. Trump emphasized that the government has a duty to protect taxpayers, enforce the law, and dismantle networks exploiting American generosity. His stance signaled the beginning of the most aggressive immigration enforcement shift since returning to office. Now, following the fraud revelations and TPS termination, President Trump instructed DHS and ICE to launch a rapid, expansive enforcement operation across Minnesota. Agents were ordered to prioritize individuals tied to criminal indictments, fraudulent organizations, or suspicious financial transfers. TPS cases were flagged for immediate review, and rapid response teams were deployed to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and surrounding cities. Federal officials emphasized that this was not symbolic. This was a targeted, high-priority action meant to dismantle any networks exploiting immigration protections. Now, Trump's unprecedented decision, it raised fierce debate among legal scholars. TPS is typically applied nationwide, not state by state. So some question whether the president could legally terminate protections exclusively for Somali nationals associated with Minnesota. But others argue that national security exceptions grant wide presidential authority. The tension created uncertainty. Lawyers scrambled, advocacy groups prepared emergency filings, and affected families sought clarity. The legal fog only intensified fear, leaving thousands unsure of their immediate and long-term status. And the aftermath inside Minnesota's Somali neighborhoods was immediate and overwhelming. Families rushed to immigration lawyers, many waiting in lines before sunrise just to secure consultations. Banks reported sudden spikes in cash withdrawals as rumors about frozen bank accounts or surprise raids spread across social media. Parents kept their children home from school, unsure of what could happen next. Confusion dominated conversations. Who qualifies for deportation? Is Ilhan Omar going to help us? Who doesn't? And how quickly changes might unfold. Now, for many, life paused overnight. Minnesota quickly transformed from this quiet Midwestern state into the epicenter of a national debate touching immigration, fraud, federalism, and counterterrorism. Media outlets framed the crisis as a battle between state negligence and federal authority. Conservatives argued Trump's actions were necessary to stop a dangerous system of exploitation. Democrats accused the administration of collective punishment. The clash of narratives intensified scrutiny, making Minnesota the front line in America's larger fight over immigration and national security. And so as federal agents prepare additional arrests, prosecutors hint at more indictments, and TPS reviews continue at full speed, one truth is becoming impossible to ignore. This is only the beginning. President Trump has promised the most expansive anti-fraud crackdown in U.S. history, and Minnesota is the opening battlefield. The nation now waits, tense and uncertain, to see how far this investigation reaches and how many lives will be reshaped by what comes next. Hit the like button and subscribe. We'll see you next time.